Hey, what's up everyone? In this video we're going to be talking about the mythical golden ratio and the ratios in fitness that are most important for attracting a partner in dating. Now, the fitness industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry that has made tons of money almost since the beginning of time. Not really the beginning of time, but like since the industrial age started. It's booming on social media and so forth. And their goal oftentimes is to be the most aesthetic. Now, of course, there's powerlifters and athletes in other sports like weightlifting or CrossFit who do it for other reasons. But in general, a lot of people, they do it for their health and well-being, but also to attract and look good for their partner or potential partner. Now, we're going to bring the science back into this because a lot of people, they're just screwing around and just saying like, this is what you should do, and this is what we assume men and women care most about. And I think this is quite ridiculous because if you do a Google search now on Google or YouTube, as of this moment, as I'm recording this video, on any topic around this, the top results will be just random, horrendous, non-science backed, cosmopolitan themed, BuzzFeed-esque listicle sites that just kind of list, oh, these are the top 10 most male attractive traits. Now, some of the better ones may use, a small, non-scientific, non-controlled survey with the general public. They'll go out and interview real people, and that's better, but it's still not perfect. It's not science-backed, and it's just hearsay. It's based off confirmation bias and anecdotes and their own random stories. So what actually does matter for male or women? And the fitness industry, they're always trying to make money, so that of course they're going to tell you, you got to work on this body part and this body part and this body part, because it will make them more money if you spend more time working out every day, buying supplements and working out more body parts. But what really matters from a male attractive standpoint? Now, of course, there's a big disclaimer I'm going to add at the end of the video in detail, but essentially, I don't want you to take this too far before I go into science and only work on like 2 body parts on your fitness routine every week or every day, because that can lead to health problems and longevity problems, and I'm already experiencing them in my 20s. I have knee pain, I have poor posture and rounded shoulders and all sorts of small things, and that's because now I have to work on my butt strength, my hip flexibility, my ankle mobility, my flat feet, all these things that aren't necessarily going to attract a girl more, but it is going to help me move better and live longer. So just keep that in mind. Don't just work on one thing like your shoulders. Your upper back for your posture is also important for attractiveness, as well as working on your butt so that your knees lock into alignment so they don't grind against each other and you have horrible joints and just pain when you're walking and sitting. So without further ado, what do men and women care about? Well, it's different, of course, based off the gender. But I have this book in front of me, by Dr. David M. Buss. But beyond this book, and this book is like one of his lifetime's work. So he cites a lot of studies on this on here. But beyond this book, if you just go to PubMed or Google Scholar, there are countless studies on this. Not as much as I wish there were. Like if you look at the fitness industry in general, a lot of more time has been dedicated to that. So like if you were to cover the topic of creatine, for example, there are hundreds of scientific studies on that. For this area of like what body parts and symmetry and proportions matter most to just attracting a partner, there's maybe a dozen or less studies, which is, it's something, but it's not hundreds or thousands. So I would love to see more emphasis put into this field, but there's also that question of where's the funding coming from. So the big ratios that are the most prevalent and most studied and looked at and confirmed time and time again are, drumroll please, the shoulder to waist ratio for men and the waist to hip ratio for women. So if you do nothing else and you just increase that to the right proportions, you're going to do good. However, there's more details that I think matter. First off, here's the huge one. The big misunderstanding for men is that bigger is always better. So they think that, you know, a shoulder to waist ratio of 3-to-1, which is just humongous. You have to be like Mr. Olympia to achieve that, or you know, some deformity, have some deformity. They assume that bigger is always better, and it turns out there's a study done on this, cross-referencing women's ratings, as well as using pictures from magazine covers catering to women versus magazine covers catering to men in bodybuilding. And what they found was shocking. It was ridiculously stunning. And basically, they found that men dramatically overestimated the optimal shoulder to waist ratio. So when they looked at, the optimal rating was around the golden or Adonis ratio, but it wasn't perfect. It was a little bit less than the golden ratio or Adonis ratio or God ratio. There's a lot of names for it. If you're not familiar with the God ratio, it's basically a ratio that works throughout many areas of nature and humans and basically life on this planet. If you look at seashells and how their curvature does from the outer shell to the next smallest shell, of the curves that spiral inward, they follow the Adonis or golden ratio. And unfortunately, life's more complicated than that. There's a lot of bodybuilders who are like, okay, just get your shoulder to waist ratio as close as you can to the golden Adonis ratio, nature's ratio, and you'll be good to go. You'll be the most attractive. Now, that's a good benchmark, but it's not perfect. It's actually slightly off because, of course, the world's more complicated. Sometimes due to all the details of nature and survival and reproduction and the predators out there, sometimes it might be better. It might not be the Adonis ratio. Might be slightly different to acclimatize for that so that humans can survive. And that's the one that's selected for more. The point, though, is that they found that, you know, a lot of these big bodybuilding magazines out there that teaching you how to build a physique. And you'll see this a lot on Instagram too. Like the most followed male bodybuilders on Instagram are these like gigantic monsters, and they have like millions of followers. And I would assume that most of these young male followers think that that is what they need to achieve the most ideal look. And you'll see this as well with a lot of these YouTubers who have gone out and surveyed what women like most in terms of physique, and they'll rate a picture of a man who has this monstrous physique, and then a whole spectrum of them down to the ones who are like super skinny, and they'll just ask like 30, 50 girls on the street, and what they find is that the girls who are in the majority of the girls, if not all of them, choose the guys who are like in the middle, not these monstrous guys. And so there's this huge misinterpretation there with all these young men thinking that they need the most largest shoulder to waist ratio, when that's not actually true. Women actually prefer something more towards the middle, and that's because of, you know, the evolutionary fitness and all these other traits. So let's just go straight into the text here and talk about this. There's countless studies that prove this. So let's jump into the waist to hip ratio. Now this one is also one of the most studied, and it's for females out there. So if you do nothing else, females, if you focus on this, you'll be in good shape. So let's cover this one paragraph in here. Singh discovered that waist to hip ratio is a powerful cue to women's attractiveness. In a dozen studies conducted by Singh, men rated attractiveness of female figures with varied in both their waist to hip ratio and their total amount of fat. Men find the average figure to be more attractive than a thin or fat figure, regardless of the total amount of fat. However, men find women with low waist to hip ratio to be the most attractive. Here's the key here. Women with a ratio of 0.70 are seen as more attractive than women with a ratio of 0.80, who in turn are seen more as attractive than those with 0.90. And they cross-analyze numerous Playboy centerfolds and winners of beauty contests over the last 30 years to confirm the invariance. Although both centerfolds and beauty contestants winners got thinner over that period, their waist to hip ratio remained exactly the same at 0.70. So similar to men, women, thanks to media and marketing and American society and movies and a confluence of commercialization and numerous other factors, what has happened here is essentially that women as well have overemphasized what they need, and they think just thinner and less fat is always better until they often starve themselves. But what really matters here is that, waist to hip ratio. You want to aim for that 0.70 or golden Adonis ratio. Now, getting into doing that is, just pure bodybuilding and fitness, and a bunch of videos online already cover this. So I won't go into detail, but it's essentially lose fat around your waist and build muscle in those areas. It's usually going to be a lot of lateral training, so for men, a lot of lateral raises, but also, not forsaking the rear delts and frontier delts. Frontier is not a word. Front delts. But lateral delts are going to be the main thing here. From the back, it's going to be your lats in general. So pull down exercises and doing a consistent amount of sets per week to get that volume up. Eating right, getting enough protein in. For women, again, you already know your glute exercises. There's going to be a lot of yoga, lateral stuff here. Hip thrusts are going to be huge, but also reducing the fat around the waist for both men and women are going to be huge. There's a lot of fitness advice already out there that cover this, but in terms of fat loss in general, you can't isolate where the fat's going to come off. You've just got to reduce the calorie intake, increase the calorie expenditure by doing more cardio or exercising. High intensity interval training is good, and eventually it'll come off of certain body parts. It's going to be different for different people, but for men it usually comes off the belly first, which is good, and then you gotta reduce the fat here and then increase the the musculature. The muscle is going to take longer, sometimes 10 times longer. It's just by the nature of muscle growth than reducing fat. But if you're like me and already pretty skinny, then it's going to be more about building that length on the sides. So great stuff here. I've also embedded throughout this video, as you've seen, a bunch of studies to specific people. Now, if you want those cited and referenced and linked to directly, I have a counterpart article that I'll link in the description to this, and there will be a section in there with a bunch of links directly to the articles I mentioned, the one that surveys all these different magazines and surveys women on shoulder to waist ratio. There's actually quite a few studies on this that confirms it, but it is the golden ratio. It is the it's the main metric that you should be concerned about if you mainly care about attractiveness and fitness. And we can go into detail about why this matters, but essentially it's about physical fitness and fertility. This is what men and women look for, because that is what will be most likely to protect them and or help them bear and protect their future children. And therefore, in ancient caveman days, there is no really muscular bodybuilder types that had 2-to-1 waist to shoulder ratios or some ridiculous huge ratio, and that's why that's not always emphasized or found most attractive. So that's good news for you, because it means less work for you. Maintaining muscle size is much easier than growing more muscle size. So I also want to plug this book. I'm not affiliated with Dr. David Buss, but he has done a lot of great work in this area. And for men, you may already know this, but it's shown that scientifically there's been a lot of studies, and women are also just they care less about physique than other things: character, personality, ambition, status, wealth, kindness, humor. So men, I think you should look at this as more of a positive thing. You always want to spin things positively, so you don't just get down on yourself and do nothing. But You don't have to worry as much about this because it matters less, because you have all these other traits to work off of, and you have longer to do so. Even into your 30s and 40s and 50s, you know, your value maintains because you have other things like status and so forth to go off of. So it's quite interesting. And again, I've talked about other areas in other videos. Status is important, but not as important as you might think. Local, just social proof is important. Again, I'm not expert at any of this, but just, you know, giving you some cool insights from these books. Hopefully this was helpful. See you in the next video.